You have the high green. The railroad is yours.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. What an opportunity to be a part of something today. I really appreciate that. What you're going to find in the next half hour or so is that I'm quite a bit more oriented visually and to equipment and locations, less to the history, although the history forms the basis for everything that we do. What fascinated me when the Barriger Library started making Mr. Barriger's photos available on their Flickr site was how many of the photos I could find were places that I recognized, and then a lot of places that I didn't recognize. But among them were about 10 photos that were taken at a place of special interest to me, and that's the city of Bureau, which is really a railroad town. There's not much that goes on in Bureau beyond the Rock Island's busy point there. And so this is one of the earlier ones. This is his CRINP number 94. You can see the notes down at the bottom. You can notice, among other things, they were proud of their city. They spelled out the word Bureau in rocks on a little slightly ramp of earth for people on passenger trains going through to see where they were. What I'm intending to do today is try to take a look at, okay, what do I see in the picture? What can I take off on it and share a little bit more based on the study that I've made of Bureau. Now, for example, this string of cars here along the side are rather intriguing. If you could focus very clearly, actually the initials on it are BRC for the Belt Railway of Chicago. Now, why does the Belt Railway of Chicago have hopper cars? I'm not quite sure, but a little bit of digging took me that in the car builders, in the official record of railway equipment, you find that they had 100 twin hoppers, all steel, in numbered 1500 to 1599. And sure enough, I found a better photo of one of those cars on an eBay sale. So, I mean, there's just an amazing amount of stuff that you can find using the internet and activities people have preserved. I have to thank a whole lot of people for photographs and so forth. You can read the names here. I will highlight a couple. Ira Eichste and his family. Ira took a lot of pictures that we'll see today, but you'll also see pictures taken by H.K. Volrath or Don Ball, Bill Raya's collection, the Rock Island Technical Society, and newspapers and all that sort of stuff. So I'm beholding to many people as far as being able to share these with you today. Roger's taken us through the building of the Rock Island. I want to just go back and look at the beginnings of the Rock Island, as it were, because they got to Bureau fairly early. As originally conceived, the Rock Island Railroad was going to be the Rock Island and LaSalle Railroad, and basically it would connect the Mississippi River with the end of the Illinois and Michigan Canal that came out of Chicago and ran along parallel to the Illinois River through these various river cities like Morris, Seneca, Marseille, and so on and so forth, before getting to the navigable part of the Illinois River there at LaSalle. So that was the original conception, but that was in the late 1840s. And then in the 1850s, they reconfigured the whole idea to run from Chicago. And they started building west in 1851, I guess. And by 1852, they had arrived at Joliet. Bureau was reached in 1853. It's about in the middle of Illinois, and it's where the Illinois River basically turns south. That's where the railroad has been following the river. And once it gets to Bureau, it has to climb up onto the plain through Tuscarawas, Sheffield, Anawan, and so forth before getting to the Quad Cities. Here's the aerial view of Bureau from the satellite using the Google Earth, and you can see what we're confronted with. The Illinois River would be off the screen over here to the right. The railroad is coming in from the northeast, making a rather broad sweeping curve and heading out to the northwest. The junction part of Bureau is that there's a line that was built under the railroad called the Bureau and Peoria Valley Railroad that the Rock Island leased for 999 years, not long after that, and forms the Rock Island's path, a secondary main line really to Peoria. What you see here in the middle of this Y connection looks today like a forest. There is a sort of a gravel road and you can kind of drive through that area, but it looks nothing like what it did in its heyday, which we'll look at some other pictures as we go along. Here's a piece of a map from 1906 showing the trackage there at Bureau. You can see the streets, Bureau Street, Nebraska Street, where the depot is located. There is a railroad hotel nearby. There's a roundhouse, and the red lines indicate that they're talking about creating a turntable there, a rather sharp side to the Y here. There's the Peoria line and the line to Rock Island. Here's a little bit later where they're now about 1910, talking about trying to broaden this curve as best they can. They're going to add coal and water facilities over here on the main line. Still shows no turntable there, although we know that will be one there eventually. So by 1938, when the state of Illinois did a whole bunch of aerial photo surveys of the entire state, one of the ones that flies over the Bureau area shows the railroad facilities as existed there. I've got some arrows pointing. The depot is here. Now you can see the turntable, the roundhouse. There's a large coaling tower. This is a shadow of the coaling tower, and a big water tank, and you can see the shadow of that as well. So I mean, this is fairly strong side lighting in this photograph. There's a small yard on the Peoria side, and there's a double track main line going that way. Of course, the railroads documented literally everything, down to the length of the tracks, how many feet, where they were. They measured everything from mile markers and line posts. This is about 1948. This drawing was created, or last updated, and shows the things that we'll take a look at as we go through today. The depot has brick platforms along the main line side, also along the Peoria side. There's pass-through tracks coming through the middle of the Y. There's the curve. Okay, so this is one of Mr. Barriger's earliest Bureau photos. I'm guessing it was in the late middle 30s, if that makes any sense, 35, 36, something like that. He's riding a train that's headed for Peoria because he seemed to have taken most of his pictures from the rear platform. And so he's looking back at the depot at Bureau. Everything's relatively clean and neat, the platforms and so forth. And so what I'd like to do as we go through this is take some examples of things that I see in the pictures and sort of expand on them. In this particular one, of course, the key subject is the depot itself, the train order signal, but there's also evidence of the water supplies. There's a tank up on the hill. There's a water column right here where it could service a train on the Peoria side. There were also spots that people would change trains in Bureau. If they were going to Peoria, they might come out from Chicago on a mainline train, and then they might have time to stop and grab a bite to eat or a drink. There are a number of taverns and restaurants and so forth right in the area of the depot. So this is from the first picture I showed showing the mainline side, and this is that same view just we looked at. There's another water column here on this side on the mainline side of the depot. You can tell this is in the Depression era because the track maintenance is pretty sad when you consider this is a mainline track here, and yet the ties are practically buried in the ballast, and there's not much drainage or anything showing there. So let's take a look at the evolution of the depot at Bureau. It was built probably around 1896, and in its original configuration was pretty symmetrical about the operator's bay, as you can see here. It actually it protrudes out into the roadway, if you can use that term loosely. This is a pretty minor road when you think about it, but that's the main line side. This is the main store in town. This is Jensen's Brothers store. They were the richest folks in town. Here's the Peoria branch side. There's a bay, operator's bay on that side as well. You get a view, and we'll talk some more about the hotel in a couple more slides. But in 1910, they made a fairly significant expansion of the depot. So in other words, instead of ending here, it goes back, it extends further to the east or northeast, and it occupies a fair amount of the road crossing. And again, from the Peoria side of the depot there in that old postcard view. So here's a drawing that shows the floor plan of the expansion. Basically, the expansion is this area here on the right-hand side that opened up the baggage room, made a place for perishable freight, created men's and ladies' waiting room, and apparently this is where they got the indoor toilets at this point. Because if you notice in the picture here, these twin windows are tall here. When in the later view, after its expansion, those windows are only half height. So it's quite likely that's because that's the toilets. In 1941, just before World War II, there was another update to the depot to kind of modernize it to go along with the rocket trains and so forth. So among other things, they got porthole type windows in some of the doors. There was a general waiting room, but part of the depot was allocated then to the signal department. The men's toilet was pretty much the same, but the ladies got a nice new lounge and toilet out of the process. Here's several views of the depot. From Don Ross's collection. Here's how it looked in the middle 50s, two-tone, probably a cream color over maroon. In the 70s, the material service red and yellow period, the depot got that sort of color. Later in the Rock era, we'll see it's blue and white. This is how it looked in 2009 when I was there. As far as I know, it's still there today along the Iowa Interstate, not really used for anything. We mentioned the paint schemes. This is the earliest years were apparently a solid maroon color. And what I did is popped a couple paint chips off the old depot at one point in time and then did some careful sanding along the edges of them to kind of reveal the colors. We know from other documentation and photos like this that the depot in the 30s and the 40s was painted in what the Rock Island called primrose yellow and bronze green. And so this is like the picture that Mr. Barriger took, except by this point the windows are no longer trimmed in white; they're trimmed with the bronze green. The cream and maroon looks kind of like this. You can see a little bit of it there. By the 60s, they were on all white for a mainline depot, so it looked more like this. The 70s were the red, and you can see the red layers here in the thing. And then when the rock image came along one more time, they painted it, and you can see it's got some blue and mostly white and a new roof, among other things. So here's a picture of the depot kind of from the standpoint of the Sanborn map. And what you can notice is there's the store, there's that Eat restaurant, and there's the depot occupying about half of the roadway for Nebraska Street. And like I say, because we expanded the depot in 1910, and this is the footprint for the hotel next to the depot. So it was known as the Interstate Hotel. It was operated by John J. Greer, who was the Fred Harvey of the Rock Island, so to speak. He operated hotels in a number of Rock Island locations, including Liberal, Kansas, and Oklahoma, someplace I've forgotten to. So here's a postcard showing the checkout counter, cigar stand, the restaurant, and so forth. I don't know how often people would stay overnight at Bureau, whether it was just railroad personnel or quite likely travelers as well. So, and here's a view from the hotel roof looking back over the roof of the depot. So you can see the mainline tracks on the west side, and the yard over here on the east side. We mentioned the water tanks. There were 3 large water tanks in and around Bureau. This one is on the Hille on the east side. We've seen it in a couple pictures. So this is another view. This is a view from this side of there was obviously a big cut coming into Bureau there. And then there was a very large water tank next to the coaling tower, which we'll talk about in quite a bit more detail later. And then there were water spigots everywhere that the locomotives could stop. Steam locomotives were just, voracious users of water. And so it was always handy if you could, while you're stopping the train for some other reason, fuel or whatever, to add the water as well. And so you can see there's even a water column built inside the coaling tower, which could service then either track on the inside there. The third water tank was just south on the Peoria line, and it included the water treatment facility. It probably drew water from a creek rather than from the Illinois River. You can see it there on Mr. Barriger's picture as he's headed south to Peoria. There's a brick structure at that point. Of course, these are long gone. Right around the depot, as we've mentioned, there wasn't much to downtown Bureau. This is pretty much what you see is what you get. This building here, the short building, was at various times a drugstore, a soda fountain, a barber shop. This is Jensen's store. There were originally 2 buildings across the way on the other side, which were replaced by a large brick building, which had like a lodge hall in the second floor. And you can see Schlitz and a bar here. So clearly they were doing drinking there too, if so designed. This one's from later. I like this view. It shows a lot of detail in the hall there, and another restaurant across the street there. And that's about it for downtown Bureau. For more than 20 years, Bureau was also serviced by the Chicago, Ottawa, and Peoria interurban line. It came right down the street, just a block from the Rock Island tracks. Here's the Rock Island tracks here. There's the interurban. And obviously people could come on the train and then catch the interurban if they say they wanted to go to Princeton. That's what this car seems to be headed in that direction. So it looks like these guys want to go on west. This is the Jensen Mansion. This is the only rich guy in town, apparently. You can see it. It's rather prominent in some of these pictures. And then going out of town, this is going west, headed towards Princeton. Here comes the Rock Island main line, and then we'll talk a little bit about the canal. So I'm called this next series Train Time at Bureau in 1942. This was just after the war had begun. I'm trying to date this picture. I'm calling it 42, and I hope I'm pretty close. But apparently John Barriger at that time was working for the government and trying to deal with a situation at the Toledo, Peoria, and Western Railroad involving a strike. And so he apparently has taken the Rocky Mountain Rocket train to Peoria and gotten off here at Bureau. It arrives at Bureau in the mid-afternoon, and it's obviously wintertime. The trees are bare. People are wearing heavy coats and so forth. But he got off, and no sooner did he get off, but he took pictures in all directions as he was standing in one spot. So he looked over to the left. There's the cars in the depot, but now you're looking at the yard here at Bureau. And then he turned around and looked back to the rear of his train. Some more of the yard over here, signals and the water column there for an eastbound train, or could service a Peoria line train here as well. And then as the train pulled away, he shot his fourth picture. So see, he didn't get back on this train. It's heading on out. So, but these pictures are in rapid succession. So he rode, like I said, the Rocky Mountain Rocket. So taking a look at the timetables for the Rocky Mountain Rocket, basically they service the Denver and Colorado Springs area from Chicago and Kansas City as well. And so there were two sections of the train that one left from Chicago, one left from Kansas City, but they were at Belleville, Kansas in the in the middle of the night here at 2:03 a.m. The Kansas City section had gotten there at 10 to 2. The Chicago section arrived at 2:03, and they were spliced together. And then when they got to Lyman, they split again, which we've seen before. And then and the same thing is going in the reverse direction. This was the first overnight streamliner on the Rock Island, went into service in 1939. They had, as other railroads did, stewardesses, nurses, or whatever that were part of the crew. So we mentioned the two sections combined. So the westbound section from Chicago would have looked like this as it passed Englewood Station in the south side of Chicago, with the main portion of the train. The Kansas City section was pulled by a unique locomotive. It was known as an AB6. It was basically a B unit with a cab designed to sort of blend in when the whole train was in one piece. It had only a single prime mover and then a baggage compartment in the rear of the train, of the locomotive, and consequently it would be switched in at Belleville and switched out again at Lyman. So here's the AB6 pulling the Colorado Springs section, and then on the eastbound side, the trains are being recombined here at Lyman. And there's a famous sequence of all of these pictures that was published in Trains magazine many years ago. As a sleeping car train, the Rock Island was kind of forced to go to two different builders to provide the service for this train. The sleeping cars came from Pullman Standard, and there were these three plus another one that I didn't have a picture of, that were mostly section cars, but also private rooms, a 822 configuration. And there were two train sets going one for each direction. So it was a daily train. There's 8-5 section. The observations had 5 double bedrooms and an observation platform. Those were all built by Pullman Standard. Bud built, as they built the original rocket trains, they built the baggage cars, the coaches. There were 4 coaches built to this plan, and 2 diners. It was also a coffee shop lounge / RPO that was built by Bud as well. All right, here's the second picture then, where he's turned, and things that I was looking for here was some clues as far as dating the photo and to look at this coal traffic, because it seems fairly significant on this portion of the Rock Island, which you might not find usual. But the Rock Island was built when in the Midwest in general, as the Rock Island was built, both in Iowa and Illinois, coal was a prime target for some of these things. And as many of the Western Granger roads, typically coal was hauled in general service gondolas, much more so than hopper cars. Although they did have one batch of 250 of what were known as Sealy hoppers that were wood-sided with hopper bottoms and these unusual chain-controlled hoppers that were designed by Charles Seeley, who was a mechanical officer with the Rock Island in the Reed Moore time frame, I think, Roger. They're still in service in this lower photo, but by early 1942, the Rock Island received its first all-steel hopper cars. Now those are what we see right here. So that tells me that the picture has to be taken in early 1942. The other way to look at it is to look at the automobiles. We had fun with some people looking at this car here, trying to determine exactly what it is. We're pretty sure it's a Nash. And it looks like the 41 license plate for the state of Illinois was yellow background with black letters. And then you can see the shape of the taillights and so forth would indicate that we're looking at a 41 Nash in early 1942. So the train's gone, and Mr. Barriger is left in bureau apparently for a while. So I don't know if he had a driver or if he chose to walk, but it's about a quarter of a mile to the west end of the Y from the depot, and then there's an overpass where Highway 29 crosses over the railroad and the canal, and he climbed up on the bridge there and took first this photo looking to the west, and then, oh well, I shouldn't say it that way. If he was at ground level, this is kind of what his train would look like. That's the Rocky Mountain Rocket with the AB6 locomotive now involved, because the Kansas City to Belleville section did not last very long, and so pretty much the railroad moved the AB6 to the main consist, added a second prime mover, and so this is later. But this is the bridge that Mr. Barriger was on when he took those pictures. It was built in 1930 and spanned not only the railroad but also the canal. So this picture I took of it in the 1970s. It's no longer there. It's the road comes down and it's a level grade crossing, and then there's a separate bridge over the canal. So we'll talk about some of the things that he sees. He's got the east-west main line. This track here with this crossover would be going to the Y. This is the canal. This is the Illinois and Mississippi Canal, otherwise known as the Hennepin Canal, and it was an antique at the time that it was built. If he'd waited a while, I mean, he would have to wait actually probably about 4 years to take this picture, but from that spot you can see a lot of trains. This is obviously an eastbound perishable, a lot of Pacific Fruit Express reefers, one of the Rock Island's brand new 1946 484s, beautiful locomotive, with unfortunately a 6 or 7 year lifespan, is all on the Rock Island. And then there's some coal cars here, and this is company coal headed for the coaling tower, I believe. So the Illinois Mississippi Canal was begun in 1890 and completed 16, 17 years later. And it marked the first usage of complete locks made out of concrete. So many of the things that were done with the Hennepin Canal had benefits to the construction of the Panama Canal just a few years later. You can see the miter type gates. They're operated manually with a crank. The lockmaster here has opened this side. You can see how the water runs through the backside of the locks. The lock is full in that point. This is the lock right near the Rock Island. Obviously, we've seen kind of this picture before with a lock that's about the second or third lock from the river. And there's the Rock Island coming in. There's the interurban coming in. Here's a map that shows the Hennepin Canal, and in a lot of ways, again, this is a microcosm of the Panama Canal, because what you're doing is you're going to rise out, just like the Rock Island had to. The water is going to rise up out of the Illinois River Valley and get to a peak somewhere around here, and then descend back into first the Rock River Valley and eventually to the Mississippi. So you need a source of water, and so there's a feeder canal that connects to the Rock River up here by Sterling Rock Falls. It has no locks whatsoever. It just runs and provides water, and then the water can flow both directions from here, because there's quite a number of locks in this first section between Bureau and near Sheffield and so forth. Once you go up on the flat, there are fewer locks, and there are locks down here. And actually, they run in the Rock River for a little bit before the rapids here by south of Rock Island. They had to have another piece of lock. Today, this is a linear park, and many of the locks, although not operable, are preserved. You can kind of go see them, see the process, and it's a good place for fishing and boating, things like that. So there are 33 locks in total and 9 aqueducts. That's where the canal goes over another body of water. So this is an example of one of the aqueducts, again, all in poured concrete, and then with the boat going through. It was way past the time when the canal should have been built. So it was never commercially successful. It was never very large, never allowed very large boats to pass through. But that's the way it is. Now, with the canal there, then the Peoria side needed a heftier bridge, and so a new bridge was built on the Peoria branch side of Bureau's Y. It's a War Department picture from the U.S. government and what it looked like when I took it back 10 years or so ago. Wonderful structure. I hope to model it someday. All right, so then Mr. Barriger turned around on the overpass and looked back towards Bureau, and this is what he saw. It says photo 175. And again, what we'll talk about is here's the mainline tracks, and you can notice the mainline tracks go right through the coaling tower. There's our water tank. There is a roundhouse and turntable, which we've talked about. And then here goes the Y track headed for Peoria. And this track, this is the coal delivery track for the coaling tower. Again, if he'd waited, or if he got in there early, he could have seen his train pull away with this is again the Rocky Mountain Rocket. This timing is really good. This is mid to late afternoon. This is an Ira Eichste photo of the Rocky Mountain Rocket. So there's the baggage car, and I mentioned the RPO coach car, and that's the Mesa Verde or Pikes Peak, and that's this car here in the train. Here's a train going around the Peoria side of the Y. It's quite, as we mentioned, quite a sharp curve, so they're going very slowly and watching. This is probably some sort of a Shriner special or something that's headed back to Peoria. And the photographer's angle was such that the water tank almost completely obliterates the coaling tower. As we'll see better pictures of that. In the steam era, Bureau was quite a busy place. As you can see in both of these pictures, you can count 3 or 4 steam locomotives in both pictures. 2, 3, 4 there. And so like I say, it was trains passed through there a lot. A few trains, mostly locals. Bureau's about halfway in the middle of Illinois, and so there were locals that would originate at Blue Island near Chicago and terminate at Bureau and turn around and then head back, and there'd be a local that would run the western side from Silvis to Bureau, and then one up back and forth up to Peoria through the towns on the Peoria branch. Here's a piece of that drawing that we looked at earlier, kind of show you the detail of the area around the roundhouse. There's the turntable. The roundhouse had an office, and there was a car inspector's building, as we'll see, a cinder pit. The cinder pit used to be on this track over here, but they got a mechanical cinder pit in 1926. It looks like that from the AFE. December 26th. And you can see here there's five stalls to the roundhouse and a little bit of a boiler room off to this side. Yeah, the roundhouse was interesting because it was built about the same time as the canal was being constructed. And so they built the basic roundhouse out of poured concrete. This drawing survived and shows them how they built the forms for one of the sections of the stalls of the roundhouse. You can see it a little bit better in this picture. Of course, the roundhouse was too small for larger locomotives, so they actually tore out the back wall and extended it by 8 or 10 feet or so. It's a detailed photo from that Corps of Engineers photo. But you can see in this side view here, the part of the roundhouse, this concrete wall, and then the wood portion a little bit after. Now, the Rock Island stopped using the roundhouse there in 1941 and leased that to a company that processed corn cobs for various industrial services. Unfortunately, it was destroyed in a fire in 1949. Here's a picture. This picture was taken in 38 on a fan trip. There's lots of nifty things to see. We'll talk about that locomotive there in a second. Here's a shot from inside the roundhouse at Bureau. You can see although the walls are concrete, the roof supports are all wood beams and wood rafters and so forth. It's an older locomotive. Here's a view that shows a loco in the roundhouse and one alongside. The turntable is there, dirt bottom to the turntable. It's what you call an Armstrong turntable. That is to say, whoever was the hostler or the engineer would park the locomotive in the middle, and then he and a couple guys would get out and they would push and they would turn the locomotive around. Here's a side view of that locomotive. But the thing that's interesting here is that to shine some light on the turntable, they have placed a locomotive headlight up here on the roof to shine down on the turntable area. Here's the other end of the turntable with a switch engine located. You can see the dirt bottom led to a bunch of weeds and so forth. The turntable wasn't near long enough for one of the 15100 series Northerns, but I'm guessing that this one has just recently dropped its ashes into the ash pit, or has just finished that, and then he's going to back out and continue with his work. Here's that Corps of Engineer photos that I used to blow up to show that the roundhouse and so forth, because I'm going to blow it up again. You can see way up here, there's the depot, there's the yard end, there's that water tank up on the hill. So blowing that up, there's the roundhouse office. It's a wood framed building. The ash pit there, the ash pit is actually here. And then the ash pit's on the other side. There's a crane that draws the ashes out of the pit and dumps them into an old hopper car. There's Jensen's mansion on the roof and the car inspector's building right there. Front view from Jerry Yerington. I think that's Jerry's father standing by the building. It's obviously rather decrepit looking at this point in time, 1952. Safety first, it says above the door, think. Here's the ash pit. There's again, that's 5119 on the dropping its ashes. There's the crane, and this is a little cart that pulls the ashes out of the pit and then dumps them into to a waiting gondola. There's not many pictures, obviously, of the car inspector's building, although in the late 70s it was still there, and somebody bothered to paint it blue. Another view of that locomotive as well. Here's the coaling tower. This was built in 1910. So this is brand new pretty much in this picture. There's a large water tank nearby, an area for sand. There was a dryer for the sand, and the sand was then fed through pipes up into tubes on the side of the coaling tower so that the sandboxes of the locomotives could be filled at the same time as the locomotives were being watered. So it's a 400-ton coaling tower. I think Fairbanks Morse design, but I'm not sure. Here's again the detail from the drawing showing where it's at. And like I say, the railroad noted where everything was. by milepost, by pole, and by feet, and so forth. This is probably the picture that got me interested in Bureau first of all. I saw this painting at some point and I bought it. I think then my future wife had it framed for me for my workroom, as by a Rock Island brakeman named P.W. Spaulding. You know, and as I've looked at it over the years, I've noticed the portions of it are rather anachronistic, because the coaling tower is there, the locomotive is there, but there's no troughs anymore, and chutes to load the thing. This shows the coaling tower just before it was dismantled, and it shows a edge of a roundhouse or a engine house building that wasn't there when the steam locomotives were there. But it's a gorgeous painting. Here's more like it. Here's a couple more of those Sealy hoppers filled with coal waiting. I assume this is a slight slant, so I can probably just take them with gravity back down in here where they would dump into the pit, and then be raised by the elevator and filled up the coal bins at the top. A couple of pictures, again, locomotives looking from both sides of the coaling tower. So it spans the two main lines. It can service a yard on this side, a yard track. It can service the siding over here on this view from the western end. So it's a total of 8 chutes in total, and then there's 1, 2, and then this one, the third. So there's 3 water spouts always stationed so that a locomotive can be serviced from any one of those places. A couple more detail shots, because I'm very interested in the coaling tower. Ira XD shows a locomotive being serviced. This is one from H.K. Volrath, I think. So, and like I say, after the steam era ended in Rock Island in about 1953, they stripped as much of the steel off as they could before they destroyed the coaling tower. So, I mean, all the chutes are gone. All that remained when I first went to Bureau in the 70s was this little piece of the pump house and sand drying facility. Like I say, Bureau was a very busy place on the Rock Island. There's a couple pictures here of the trains. This one's a westbound passenger train going through the cut to the east of the depot. Here's a eastbound coming off the Peoria side, heading east with RPO and a baggage, 2 baggages and 3 coaches. You can see a little bit of the roundhouse behind there, and that's the top of the coaling tower up there. Paul Stringham liked this little rise up to the water tank to take some pictures. So here he's got the Des Moines Rocket. This is 1938, one of the original trains. It's coming around the curve. You can see it's not, the Peoria train would have been on the track where the steam locomotive is. Here's a northbound train. This is train 210 coming through Sancati, which is just a bit north of Peoria, headed for Bureau. But I mean, it's a train, but it's 1, 2, 3 cars: a baggage car, an express car, and a coach. Here's another one of my favorite 484s heading through Bureau going east. Also a Paul Stringham photo. Stock cars tended to be up front because they'd want to get rid of them as soon as possible, and they wanted to keep them away from the crew, the caboose end of the crew. So by the locomotive, the smell would go to the back. So that's why they end up in the front in many pictures. So here's a piece of the timetable from 1943, and it shows 11 westbound first class trains, of which the 2 Peoria Rockets and the Des Moines Rocket are there, plus the Rocket was train 7. The Californian, the Golden State, these others are still heavyweight trains in 1943. There's the time that they're in Bureau. From the same timetable, you can see that there were 6 more westbound scheduled freight trains. You know, Western Merchandise, California Gold Ball, blah, blah, blah. Now, as a busy place, and the Rock Island continued to improve on signaling and control system. In 1943, they installed centralized traffic control in this area to help them run in both directions on each of the double track mains. And that involves setting up a CTC machine in the depot at Bureau, controlling about 12 miles of track between Spring Valley on the east and then the crossovers to the west of Bureau. And so this is the machine. Here's a photo showing the agent there with his controls. He's got a train sheet here that he's keeping track of, and I'm guessing he's got his telegraph key to work to write train orders, because they still use train orders to go along with the timetable. But he could use his switch controls and signal controls to keep traffic moving by moving things from the right-hand main to the left-hand main. As a result, since you're running on either the right-hand main or the left-hand main, it required a new set of signals to go with the CTC. And this signal bridge was set up immediately adjacent to the depot for eastbound trains. This mast here has the signals for trains that are moving on the right-hand main on normal traffic. These signals here are for eastbound trains running on the left-hand main or the westbound main. These signals are for trains that are coming on the Peoria branch, and then we'll go either on the right-hand main or the left-hand main. There's a crossover right over here. So the controller would, the operator would control how to keep those trains. Similarly, on the east of the depot, there was a second set of signals, again, two-way signals for the westbound and east and westbound main and the reverse westbound main. So there's two sets of signals on a simpler bridge type structure. That's probably the Peoria Rocket, I'm guessing. I don't know. This is some of the original Rocket cars here. These are newer ones, and then the observation back at the back. Required one more westbound signal to get out of the siding by the coaling tower. The coaling tower is long gone, but the signal is still there in this Dick Wilhelm photo, and this signal was still there in this photo that I took. And it's, as far as I know, it's still there. Not operating, but it's still sitting there. Service to Peoria was provided between Peoria and Bureau, and right after the Rockets were introduced, they modernized one of their gas electric cars and created what they called the Rocket Junior. And this car made 2 round trips a day between Peoria and Bureau, helping to make connections with trains, that westbound trains or eastbound trains passing through Bureau, to give more options to the Peoria customers. So there it is on the Peoria side with the Bureau depot. Very nice looking locomotive. Here's the public timetable from 1938. And it was basically the trains 221 and 227 from Bureau to Peoria, or 222 and 228 from Peoria up to Bureau. Notice this is that night here, the last run. But by the spring of 42, the Rocket Junior had been replaced by bus service, but they made 3 round trips. So it's not clear to me when Mr. Barriger got done with his photo taking and wanted to continue to Peoria, whether he caught the Rocket Junior or if he took a bus to get to Peoria. But this is the timetable. It shows that. Here's what the buses look like. Catherine made a model of this, which I thought was really cool. Dick Wilhelm took this photo in the 60s. This is obviously from the 50s, and the bus would meet the trains there. There's that cantilever signal bridge. And one more timetable to show the bus service is now 4 trips a day in 1951. So 6 ways to get from Peoria to Bureau: 4 by train, 2 by bus. Now, I don't want to spend any amount of time particularly, but as the steam era ended, things changed for Bureau an awful lot. They replaced the roundhouse, which had burned down anyway, in the turntable, with a prefabricated engine house in 1953 and a diesel fuel tank. And that's what it looks like. There's the fuel tank. And there would be a local switcher assigned to Bureau, but not to the extent that it was in the steam era. So these are rather small. It's a 700 horsepower switcher and so forth. The engine house itself didn't even last that long at Bureau. It was taken down probably within 2 or 3 years, but it's quite possible it was reassembled up in Ottawa, and it still stands at near the sand pits there in Ottawa. I took these pictures again about 10 years ago. So time marches on, as they say. So it's time for questions and comments. You can see this is a 50s vintage picture with the cream colored depot. That's my email address if you want to ask me a question. We have a group on the IO platform called Rock Island Lines. You can take that link to it, and to just answer maybe the first or only question about why am I doing all this. I'm building models of some of the stuff, and I want to feature Bureau. And so I've been working for many years on a model of the coaling tower, of the cantilever signal bridge, and to my own way, the CTC machine. So that's it, Nick.
Okay, thanks, Steve. We've got the chat open. I will go ahead. Oh, people are already taking advantage of it. Great. Our first question is, when was the hotel raised? And thank you for a great show, Steve.
Oh, the hotel went down in, I think, 1931. I think that it was early 30s, because then they picked up the whole depot and moved it to the west. I should have mentioned that, and I don't think I did. I don't know if I can find that slide quick or not.
Oh.
That's close.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I didn't. It was on the one of them. I don't remember which one it was. Yeah, okay, but yeah, it was 1930, early 30s. It was mentioned, and then the whole depot was picked up and moved.
Okay. I found it interesting that Bureau had an engine facility, a real roundhouse, an engine facility with 5 stalls, and in that immediate vicinity of the town, it seemed, or the junction, it seemed pretty quiet. It was busy enough that it needed that large a facility.
Yeah, I think, well, and when you go back to when it was built, that would be trains were smaller, shorter, oftener, if I could say that word that way. So that, yeah, they and so I guess the switching at Bureau would be enough to support having a roundhouse there. I mean, certainly you're about, I think you're 70, 80 miles. I've forgotten the exact mileage from Chicago, but it was an ideal place to coal and water the locomotives on their westbound. Even though, I mean, they had coal, they had water, they had water at every depot, and they had coal. They had a big coaling tower near Morris, which is, only about 30 or so miles east of Bureau. So I don't know beyond that. Like I say, I firmly believe that they did a lot of local interchange. In other words, if you want to take Roger's point about cable wanting to run through trains, the through freights went through Bureau, but there were all those towns in between that did have grain elevators, and there were coal mines and oil dealers and all that sort of stuff. And so there were local trains that would go either from Blue Island down to Bureau and hit all those places like from Joliet west, Morris and Seneca, and Ottawa and LaSalle, Utica. I mean, Ottawa is huge sand area. That sand is very good silica sand for making glass and so forth. So it was very busy there from a local standpoint. New Jersey Zinc had a huge zinc smelting facility at Depew, which is just a little ways to the east of Bureau. There was strip mines around Atkinson for coal, plus all of the grain in that area west of Bureau. So yeah, so there were lots of local trains. So they would be essentially terminated at Bureau, and the cars would be swapped around, and so the local train back to Blue Island would take the cars that belonged to the further east, and so on and so forth. So there were both through freights and local freights, in my opinion.
Okay, interesting. We have another question, and again, a compliment about the presentation. Did the Rock Island serve coal mines near Bureau, such as on the Peoria branch?
I'm not aware of any coal on the Peoria branch. No, like I say, there was coal, big coal strip mines. Midland Electric had a strip mine, and coal came out of the ground there by Atkinson, and my presumption is a fair amount of that coal, if it was the right size and grade, went straight to Bureau and went into the locomotives. I know they also serviced coal mines on the other Peoria branch from Rock Island down around Lafayette.
Okay. We have another question from Greg. Was Material Services Red a fan name for the paint scheme, or was it related to Crown's control of the rock officially?
I don't know whether it was a fan or unfan, but I mean, yeah, it was definitely related to the Crown interests. It's the same to go with the locomotive. You see that painting there. Besides the depot there, the locomotive's been painted bright red with the yellow trim. Our buddy Phil Weibler would tell you about being instructed to create that kind of paint scheme.
Very red. We have another question. Were helpers stationed at Bureau, or were engines changed on through trains?
I don't believe engines were changed on through trains at all. No, I don't know about helpers. I mean, you're coming out of the of Valley, but I don't know of any particular helpering. It may be back in the turn of the 20th century or something like that, or earlier. But beyond that, no, I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Now I have a question about. Oh, here we go. Another compliment on your presentation. This is from Bob. I don't have a last name showing up. Bob's family was from Bureau, and worked for the Rock Island and Hennepin Canal. When they were proposing that canal, I can't believe anybody signed off on it, looking at what was going on with the rail industry at the time, and then the automobile's just around the corner, but World War I has to really take place for that to get hold. What was kind of the pitch for that? I mean, it's so late in the canal era. Was it transportation that was not under railroad control, or was it a make-work project?
Ooh. One of the things that I find interesting is there are fan groups for literally everything. And so it's not surprising that I think the name of it is the American Canal Society.
Yeah.
That studies the history of canals. And there was a whole series of articles on the creation and the building of the Hennepin Canal number of years ago now, but they were fascinating reading. I think people always looked upon water transportation as being free, provided by our good Lord, and so that's why so many canals were built, and why the Michigan and Illinois Canal was built, and so now the Illinois and Mississippi seem to be to some people, at least a logical extension. Now, the usage of the Hennepin Canal was really limited. I'm trying to remember which direction they were going, but Morton Salt had some small barges that used it. International Harvester hauled some stuff. I think they hauled scrap from their factories in the Quad City area back to their steel plant and foundry in Chicago that went by boat. But no, it was just, it's amazing that it was built. You're right. I think that, somebody must have had some money somewhere that thought they could make some more money.
And we are getting comments. Bob saying my understanding is that it was mostly for cheap transportation in support of raw materials. The railroad making the canal obsolete because it ran along the banks before the digging was complete. That's from Bradley Scott. And there's a surge in canal construction and proposals after the turn of the century because of the Panama Canal. I can see that too.
It could be, but this was built before the Panama Canal.
True.
I mean, the Bureau Creek follows the basic same pathway. I mean, I think they expanded on Bureau Creek to build the canal. It's not like they just said, oh, here's a bunch of dirt, let's dig a canal. But they saw that there was a water course that carried them at least part way up. That's the water course that the Rock Island followed to get out of the valley. So the Rock Island was there. The Rock Island was there from the 1850s. But yeah, if you have grain, you pay so much for a boxcar full of grain. I don't know, maybe you felt like you paid less if you put it in a barge and shipped it on the canal and got in the Illinois River and went to St. Louis. I don't know. Or went to the Mississippi River and went to St. Louis or whatever.
I have learned living or working next to the Pot Inland Waterways Library that the waterways are favored by commodity haulers, in particular because it allows you a longer time in transit, and the commodity market likes to, you may have a barge of grain that gets sold multiple times from the time it leaves the loading terminal on the Mississippi River up near Dubuque to when it gets to New Orleans. And in fact, I heard a story, a friend of mine, Scott Muskoff, had done an article in the Missouri division of the Rock Island, and he was interviewing employees, and he learned that they were seeing a surge in grain traffic when they were 5 mile per hour, where they were a 5 mile per hour railroad near the end. And Greg may have also backed this up, where they were saying, a lot of grain was moving on the rock because it was so slow, and allowed the commodities market to sell the product multiple times like it would be on a barge. So let's see. Any more questions for Steve? Okay, Steve gave his contact information on this. You can watch the video when it goes online if you need that again, or you can email me directly. We will now switch to Greg. We'll give everybody a couple of minutes to get a water or take a break. So about 3:10, we'll go to the twilight of the gods, as it were, for the Rock Island.